This time on Goss's Garage, we're joined once more by Rick Robinson of American High Performance in Lorton, Virginia. Rick, welcome back to Goss's Garage.
Thank you, Pat.
All right, now you've got some very interesting components sitting out here, and something that a lot of people who are into high performance, they think about go fast, but they don't think about stopping well.
Right. And as we've said before, we like to sit down with our customers and really figure out what it is they want to achieve with their car, what kind of driving they're going to do, how they're going to use the car, what's their ultimate goal. And one thing that we really emphasize to them is if you're going to make this thing go fast, you got to be able to stop it too. And braking performance is extremely important in any performance car.
Okay, so what are some of the things that you typically recommend?
Well, there's three basic components to a braking system. You have the caliper, which provides the clamping power to try to stop the car. You have the pad, which is what seats up against the rotor, or in older cars, a drum, to provide the friction surface. And then you have the rotor, which is attached to the wheel, which is what you're using to try to stop the car. All three of those come into play and have to balance with each other to provide the optimum stopping performance. If you want to get more stopping of power, you have to address all three of them. You can start with just a pad upgrade. There are different pad compounds out there. You'll see racing compounds that are meant strictly for the racetrack.
Okay, now when we're talking about compounds, folks, what referring to is the materials that go into the friction on the pad itself.
Correct.
There are different recipes that they use.
Correct. This is the friction surface of the pad that rubs against the rotor. And as you can imagine, with the rotor spinning through this pad at several thousand RPM, it's going to get fairly hot. So what this compound is made out of has a very critical effect on how the brake performs. All of this is glued together with resins that tie the materials together, and what that's made out of is a part of how the pad performs. And different compounds will have different characteristics. You can get better friction out of a particular compound, but it also might produce more noise. It might produce more dust. We all see the black brake dust that appears on your wheels after you haven't had it washed for a few months in the wintertime. And that's coming off of the material that's on these pads being worn off by the rotors. The more aggressive the compound from a stopping perspective, typically the more dust it's going to produce as well. So there's drawbacks to pros and cons of each side.
All right, so we need to have friction that matches how we're going to drive. But then, just doing the pads, what you're going to achieve is going to be limited.
Correct. You're going to see a marginal increase in performance just from a change in pad compound. So you might go from 130 feet, 60 to 0 stopping distance to 120 feet. Well, that 10 feet can make a difference in the panic stop, but it's not going to be a dramatic change in stopping power. To get that change that you're really going to feel inside the car, we have to address the other two components, which is the caliper and the rotor. This is the typical caliper that you're going to see in most American production cars. This one is off of a Jeep Cherokee, so it's even a little bit larger than, say, the Honda brake caliper that this one came off of. But it's a single piston caliper. This is the piston. It clamps the pads between that and this outer portion of the frame. And it's a floating caliper, so the caliper floats over the top of the rotor to try to center itself as the pads wear. This is a factory upgrade. This particular one came off of a Mustang Cobra. Now it's a two-piston caliper. It still does not have any pistons out here on the outer portion of it. There's two pistons on the inner portion. Gives you a larger pad area, So more friction surface to work with and more clamping power because you have 2 pistons instead of one.
But this is still a floating caliper, so
This is
it
still a floating
moves
caliper.
in order to clamp.
Anytime the pistons are on one side of the caliper only, it has to be a floating caliper in order to center itself over the rotor, because the rotor's fixed on the axle. If this is not good enough for you, there are 4 piston versions of this, which have 2 pistons on the outside. So now I have 4 pistons clamping those pads together. And because I have pistons on the outside and on the inside, they can balance themselves as far as centering over the rotor goes, and the caliper can now be fixed in the frame of the axle, which adds to the strength and stability of the caliper. So that's the next level of upgrade from here.
Okay. Now, from there, we're talking about the pads, we're talking about the calipers, but we also need to do something with the rotors.
Right. So this is your typical stock rotor. This particular one goes with this caliper for the Jeep Cherokee, and it's your average size caliper, anywhere from 10 to 11 inches in diameter. It's going to have a surface area here on the clamping surface that's appropriate for the size of the pad that goes with that caliper. And a rotor really acts as a lever arm. Just like the wrench that you use to get a bolt loose on your car, if I'm using this one, I can only put so much torque on that bolt. If it's rusted and stuck in the car, I need more leverage to get it off, right? So I go to a longer one. And
If that isn't enough.
that isn't long enough, I get a pipe that's about 4 feet long,
Exactly.
and I put it on here, and I get some real leverage against it. It's all about leverage. A rotor is exactly the same thing. It just happens to be a circular lever arm because it has to rotate with the wheel. But the bigger the diameter of the rotor, the further I can move the caliper out away from the axle, the center of rotation, and the more torque I can apply to the wheel to stop it, and the better braking power that I have. So if I want to really increase my braking performance, I need to get this rotor bigger so that I have a bigger moment arm.
Something like we have here.
And so if you really want to step up to the big dogs, we go with something like this, which is a 6-piston racing caliper. You can see inside there that there's 3 pistons on each side. They're graduated in size because there's different clamping forces from one side to the other as the rotor goes through it. And I made it up with this big boy, and I'm not even going to try to reach across here and pick this thing up.
Yeah, it's
Because as you can see, it's huge. It's a 14-inch rotor off of a GT500. Today, they're making them even bigger than that. The Camaro Z28, the Shelby GT350R, the Corvette ZR1s and Z06s all come with 15-inch rotors, and some cases a little more. I think the Camaro is like 15 3/8 inches in diameter. Huge rotors. Material comes into play there as well. The one for the Corvette was a carbon metallic compound. It looked like it was corroded when you looked at it. It had all of these little black specks in it from the carbon. The ones on the Camaro Z28 are the latest technology, which is carbon ceramic. They aren't metal at all. They're plastic, basically, but they're carbon ceramic. They're extremely strong. They're extremely hard. They're almost as hard as diamonds. And my understanding is they don't wear at all, which is good because you don't want to have to pay to replace those things. And the only thing you really have to worry about with those is heat. Heat is the biggest detractor in braking performance.
Well, that's one of the reasons for bigger rotors, because they act like a heat sink.
Right, the more material I have, the more heat it can absorb without increasing the surface temperature. The surface temperature is what we worry about. Because as the surface temperature increases between the rotor and the pad, this material on the pad can actually start to burn and release gases that can make the pad start to float on top of the rotor, just like hydroplaning on a wet road. And that will significantly impact your braking performance. And one of the reasons that you see drilled and slotted rotors. those slots in the holes don't increase the clamping power at all. They release the gas that builds up underneath the pad so that the pad can maintain its clamping performance.
All right, now one other thing, as you go to bigger rotors, you automatically get more surface area on the friction material, which helps the
Correct. You can see the difference between this little Honda pad and this pad that goes with this big system pad, 6-piston caliper. And as you mentioned, there's cars out there today that even have 8-piston calipers. When you look at them through the wheel, they cover like almost half the circumference of the brake.
Some of them are just absolutely enormous.
Yeah, and the expense is proportional to the size as well.
But now all of this stuff, it isn't for everybody.
No, it isn't. For the typical street car, you're not going to need something like this. And the drilled and slotted rotors, they look great on the car. Guys who are building a car primarily for car shows love them because they look neat inside the spoked wheels. But the way we drive typically out on the street, you're not going to generate the kind of heat necessary to create the gases that those slots and holes are designed to relieve.
Okay, so for the average car, the average driver that just wants better brakes, what would you recommend?
I would start with just a pad upgrade. We'll change them to a different compound. I wouldn't go straight to a race compound because, like I said, there's drawbacks to that. But there's improved performance ceramic pads that will increase your braking performance. If we can't get enough to make you happy there, then we're probably going to step up in caliper size and design to begin with. Maybe go to a 4-piston caliper to give you increased clamping and a bigger pad area. That's going to improve it quite a bit. But to really get the stopping power that you want for a true high-performance car, you got to get up to the big lever arm and the big rotor. That has its consequences as well. All of this has to fit inside of a wheel.
So now we need bigger wheels.
That's right. If I've got 17, even some 18-inch wheels, that system right there with this big 6-piston caliper and 14-inch rotor are not going to fit inside.
Well, Rick, now here we have this in action. This is stock setup on a Cadillac CTS-V, and as we can see, the rotor just about fills the wheel on this.
Right, and the thing we got to watch out for is that clearance on the other side there between the caliper and the wheel.
Yeah, you get back in here, and the caliper is so big that I can't even fit that wrench handle between the caliper and the wheel.
Yeah, we've seen applications where I barely have an 1/8 of an inch clearance between the caliper and the wheel. Now that's enough, so it doesn't rub, but you really got to be careful with them.
All right, so pads first. Watch out for pure racing pads because a lot of those really don't stop that well until they get blazing hot.
That's true. They perform better under heat. They're designed for that. And if out on the road, you're not going to get them that hot, so you're not going to get the advantage.
Right. And remember that as you go up in these pads that you may have more dirt and they may wear faster and there may be more noise and so on. So take all of that into consideration.
Correct.
And only if you're hardcore, consider something like this.
And if you're ready to spend some money, then you can step up into a larger caliper and rotor design. And you don't have to go all the way to this. This kind of a system right here is typically going to cost you somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 just for the front axle, the front two wheels. You can go to a 4-piston caliper and say a 13-inch rotor, still get it inside your 17-inch wheel and have much better stopping power.
Okay. Well, Rick, I want to thank you as always. Appreciate your being here.
Pat, our listeners can reach us at AmericanHighPerformance.com on the web. We also have a store at AmericanHighPerformance.biz, and you can reach us by telephone at 703-339-7412.
And if you have a question about anything here on Goss's Garage, drop me a line at radio@goss-garage.com.